Is Minshew Mania set to reignite in Indianapolis on Sunday, where it first began back in Jacksonville? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks, which is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use all lowercase on that code for a first deposit match up to $100. What's up, everybody? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks from horseshoehuddle.com. And you know us as, here, the boots on the ground, bringing you the latest scoopage from the team facility. Zach is going nuts with these film reviews, just doing it the best he can, which is better than how everyone else does it, for my money. On today's show, we're going to wrap up our final thoughts on Colts and Jags. Offense and defense, the run game, totally different vibes than back in week one. Passing game is going to be led by Gardner Minshew. Defensively, what can you do against Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley, if anything? And then we'll give you our predictions, let you know what we're thinking in terms of final score and all that good stuff. So Zach, you and I just touching base here after a few shows. We've got some catching up to do in terms of roster moves, some pretty intriguing ones for draft nerds like us, I would say, more so probably than the common fan. So, of course, Anthony Richardson went on IR. Everyone knows that one. Ike Bedecker went onto the roster in his spot. But the Colts signed Kellen Mond and Anthony Miller to the practice squad, and they released Juwan Winfrey from the practice squad in that corresponding move. So Kellen Mond is a guy who you and I have talked about for years sporadically. Like, he was in his own tier. Like, if there's first round talents, second round talents, third round talents, and then there's Kellen Mond round talents.
Yeah.
And then Anthony Miller for me was a guy coming into the draft that I compared to Antonio Brown. Hasn't worked that way, but that's what I saw.
I mean, look, that's how we get with being draft nerds. But yeah, Kellen Mond is a fascinating quarterback prospect, because if you would watch his highlights and watch him in spurts in college, you were thinking first round prospect. There were some really, really good moments. And then when you watch the whole thing, you're like, maybe not. Right. Maybe not. Now, the Vikings still took him pretty high. I think they took him in the second round to develop behind Kirk Cousins. And I think that experiment lasted like a year and a half before they cut him, or like a year before they cut him. And then he ended up with the Browns, and now he's, obviously with the Colts. I think the biggest thing I really take from the Kellen Mond signing to the practice squad is just that the Colts kind of have this desire to develop a big armed athletic quarterback as their future emergency quarterback. Now, I do think they like Sam Ehlinger quite a bit, so I'm not going to say that they're trying to move off Sam Ehlinger like aggressively or anything, but Kellen Mond's going to get a chance in practice and behind the scenes to, kind of supplant Sam Ehlinger as that third quarterback. I don't think he's going to do it because Ehlinger is just a better quarterback, but I do think the Colts are looking for that type of mold from their emergency quarterback. So Kellen Mond gets a shot at it here. Again, Sam Ehlinger will probably hold him off there. And then Anthony Miller, like you said, that's, draft nerds' favorite guy right there. I don't remember being too high on him, but I don't know if I watched him too much. But yeah, Anthony Miller, I know he was like a second or third round pick out of Memphis, I believe. Yeah. Second out of Memphis to the Bears. Obviously not having the career that you would expect, but a good amount of touchdowns in the NFL. Maybe you can get him on the practice squad and just see what you can do. And I like the Colts just grabbing talented players to throw in the practice squad and use them as that, here's your 3 games, you come up, do the special teams thing, run a couple snaps on offense, and then we're going to bring up a different one like KJ Hamler. We're going to bring up Amari Rodgers. We're going to bring up all these other guys. Like, it's just different guys for 3 games, and you kind of save a roster spot doing that. I kind of really like that idea.
It's a really interesting collection of talent. We could go on about that all day, but let's talk about this Colts offense against the Jacksonville defense. So we obviously saw what happened in week one. The Colts' only multi-score loss of the season. But fast forwarding 5 weeks from then, Jacksonville has the 27th pass defense. They allowed 200 262 yards per game through the air and 7.5 yards per attempt. But sacks is somewhere they really struggle. They're tied for 26 near the bottom of the league with just 9. If you caught crossover Thursday, that's an area that Wig really was concerned with as well. And then their run defense, though, like a lot of these run defenses the Colts have been facing lately, they rank pretty well. Fifth run defense at 81.6 yards per game and 3.7 yards per carry. The Titans looked even better on paper last week, and the Colts came out and just absolutely punched them in the mouth. So are you expecting the Colts to kind of flip the script on the run game? Because, again, it was like 13 carries for 26 yards or something like that from the running backs in week 1.
Yeah, it was atrocious in week 1. Obviously, headlined by the starting running back having less than a yard per carry in that one. Just a horrendous game there for the Colts running game. But since then, they've been fantastic. I actually wrote an article about it recently, just how this running game has been so diverse, unique, and explosive the last couple of weeks since Zach Moss has returned. And they're averaging, like 160 yards rushing per game over that span with like 4.8 yards per attempt. So, I mean, that first week obviously was terrible. And maybe that is because the Jaguars have such a great run defense, but the Colts have really found their rhythm in the run game. But looking at this Jacksonville Jaguars defense, it's fairly similar to, not schematically, but similar in terms of just production this year to a Matt Eberflus type defense that we had in Indy the last couple of years, where they're going to give up passing yards. They're not really going to pressure the quarterback, but they're going to be tough against the run, and they're going to shut it down in the red zone. They're going to come after you in the red zone, force you to field goals, force you to 4-and-outs, or fourth downs and not convert. They're a competitive defense. They're a good defense. I know, again, the passing numbers don't look amazing, but they get after it. They do some really good things. But I think really where you can really attack this defense is with a quick passing game, with getting that ball out of your hands to your pass catchers in space and making them have to tackle you in the open field. Because if you're going to try to sit back and throw it deep on them, they have speed at corners that's kind of tough to combat with. And then if you're just going to try to pound it up the middle, they have some big boys up front that are really good at stopping it there. So I don't think the Colts change too much of their game plan. They're still going to use Zach Moss. They're still going to use Jonathan Taylor in the run game to kind of open up the pass game. But I do think we're going to see a lot of quick passes, getting the ball out of Gardner Minshew's hands and letting those receivers, Kylan Granson, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman Jr. go to work in that short to intermediate game.
I was going to say that I think this was Kylan's best game so far. 4 catches for 39 yards. Drew Ogletree had a nice catch up the seam for 20 yards before leaving with a concussion. Downs, 3 catches for 39 yards, I think it was. So those middle of the field things, those shorter things that Gardner kind of relies on, it does seem like that might be a strength in this one. So that should be a really good point of attack. I was going through looking at some areas that Jacksonville has given up decent performances. You look at Pittman at 8 for 97 and a touchdown. Tank Dell from Houston had 5 catches for 145 yards and a touchdown. Bijan Robinson is really the only running back to do a whole heck of a lot. 19 touches for 137 yards, but he's kind of an alien. And then last week in London, Stephon Diggs, 8 for 121 and a touchdown, and Gabe Davis, 6 for 100 and a touchdown. Do you think, especially going from last week, now I know the Bills were kind of fighting back and really getting some attitude in the second half, but do you think this is an area where Alec Pierce might finally be able to do something, or is it still going to be just quicker, shorter stuff?
It depends on Minshew, because Minshew is typically the type of quarterback who wants to get the ball out quick, who doesn't really want to take downfield shots and won't hold the ball, because this Jacksonville Jaguars pass rush, it's not good on their initial rush, but they have the athletes to get after you if you hold the ball and try to force something down the field or try to extend a play. We saw that with Anthony Richardson in week 1, where pretty much all the sacks he took were not on the offensive line. They were on him trying to extend the play. And that's half of the Jaguars' sack production this season was in that first game, just because Richardson was trying to extend plays. So how often does Minshew try to get out of the pocket? How often does he try to hold the ball for the bigger play when the short one is there for him? I don't know. I think we'll see a couple shots to Pierce, but it really comes down to Minshew's willingness and aggressiveness to attack down the field. I don't really want him to attack Tyson Campbell, me personally, but maybe off of Darius Williams on the other side, throw a couple 3-by-1 jump balls and just see what happens. I wouldn't be opposed to that, but again, it comes down to what kind of game plan the Colts want in this one and what they think Minshew is capable and willing to do.
Yeah, and again, you guys can catch all that Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern on the SiriusXM app. That's at SXM, and then just search for Colts Or if you're a Jaguars fan coming in, you can search for Jaguars as well and get your local scoop. But for now, we're going to shift focus to the defensive side of the ball, and we're going to bring you a word from our friends over at Jase First. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase Case. The Jase Case provides five life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure that you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using our code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Zach, I'm hoping Jase Medical has something for me to rebound from this illness, because I've never spoken more poorly than this week on these shows. It's really been rough.
You're trying your best. You're trying your best, Jake. But before we get to the defense, guys, football season is here, and Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On NFL Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on every Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Hosts Tanitra Batiste, Jarvis Davis, and Kyle Krabs will break down every game on the NFL slate to get you ready for your team's matchup, your fantasy lineups, your betting angles, and more. Plus, get an in-depth local analysis from our stable of NFL hosts across the country who know these teams better than anyone else. Find Locked On NFL Kickoff Live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On NFL YouTube channel. All right, Jake, so getting into the defense here, week one was good and bad. There were some really good moments from the Colts defense in that week one loss. Obviously, they had the fumble return for the touchdown. They had quite a few pressures and sacks in that game, and they really held strong on third and fourth down in that game. But it was a pretty rough game overall in terms of pass defense, in terms of red zone defense. Red zone defense was a really big issue in that first week game against Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars offense. So you kind of want to see a little more consistency and a more well-rounded game from the Colts defense this time out, even though they're coming off a couple stretch of games here where they really haven't played that well. You want to see them kind of bounce back a little bit here against the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, we've seen Jacksonville's interior offensive line kind of struggle a little bit lately. Shatley and Fortner and particularly have not been grading out very well. And we saw back in week one, this Jacksonville game was probably the best performance we've seen as a duo from Buckner and Stewart so far this year. Really an all-pro performance. And that's even taking away Buckner's scoop and score touchdown. Like they were just killers throughout the whole game. So that was really good to see. My main thing on this is, like, you and I feel like we came away dumbstruck at what Trevor Lawrence was able to do.
Yeah.
Like, for me, I think it sounds just cheesy in coach speak, but like the Colts have just got to like do their job and be in the right position for things, because Lawrence is going to just do some goofy things that just work out. And he has the perfect receiver for that to capitalize in Calvin Ridley now, because Ridley's explosive and electric route runner. They're just going to be able to do things that no matter how good you're performing, they're just going to connect. And so the more often you're in the right spot, the less damage some of that stuff is going to happen. But I mean, Trevor Lawrence just isn't real. Like that video with the lady on the plane, she was actually watching Trevor Lawrence highlights.
One thing I will say about this matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars offense, because I think this is a matchup that for defenses, it's concerning because you're going against a really talented and really skilled quarterback, and he can do a lot of things out there. Obviously, Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk are good players. Travis Etienne is an explosive running back, but they have not been very efficient. They haven't been very effective as an offensive unit this year, and that's because they kind of lack that symmetry with their play calling, with their design, and with their execution. That's kind of what we've seen from this Jaguars offense. We saw it in week one where, okay, Trevor Lawrence is making this off-platform 40-yard pass down the sideline that a guy's hauling in for a big catch. But then every single 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, they're doing like a wide receiver screen that's being stuffed. They're doing a run up the middle that's being stuffed. They're throwing an incomplete pass against the Colts' best cover guy or something like that. A lot of these boneheaded decisions are just bad execution. Obviously, the fumble from Trevor Lawrence, they didn't jump on. They let the Colts just jump on and return it for a touchdown. It's just an offensive unit that is kind of defunct and a little weird, a little weird as an offensive unit.
Yeah.
Like they should be much better than what they are. And I think a lot of that is, when you're playing against this type of team, you have to let them beat themselves. You can't let them beat you. You have to make them have as many opportunities on offense to beat themselves, because the Jacksonville Jaguars this year on offense have been beating themselves up quite a bit. Most of the time when they're not scoring touchdowns, it's because they're shooting themselves in the leg and then they're throwing the ball backwards or whatever, or letting teams return big fumbles for touchdowns and stuff like that. So I think that's the big thing for the Colts, is limit the explosives, kind of do what they did against the Tennessee Titans last week, where it's like, hey, we're going to limit the explosives because they're not this effective offense that can just, when they get to the red zone, can dial up this great play to score a touchdown. They don't have the symmetry on their offense to do that. So what we saw last week is, yes, the Titans were moving the ball really well, but every time they got to the red zone, the Colts defense stood strong, and you can't win in the NFL only kicking field goals. We saw that last week with the Tennessee Titans. So if the Colts can stay strong, if they can make the Jaguars have to go 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 play drives on them, like, yes, you don't want to be on the field that long, but the Jaguars are not going to score touchdowns on those drives. They just don't have the type of offense for that. They are big play, big explosive. Let Trevor Lawrence do some magic. Let ETN break off a 30-yard run. Let Calvin Ridley sneak out behind your defense. That's how we're going to score, because we're not this hyper-effective, hyper-efficient, well-coached unit right now. I think they're a really good team. I think they're a really strong team, but if you make them have to go up and down the field on you using 100 plays, they're going to make a big mistake. And this Colts defense has been capitalizing on offenses making that big mistake this year. So as long as they get the red zone defense figured out compared to what they did in week 1, where they, every time the Jaguars got in the red zone, they scored. So if they can just stay strong in the red zone, make the Jaguars make that big mistake, I think the defense can bounce back against a really good quarterback.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people question Press Taylor throughout the season and the play calling. So I definitely know what you're talking about there. But shoot, yeah. One other area I was really interested in is obviously things in the passing game didn't go quite that well. Calvin Ridley went off. Zay Jones had that nice touchdown. Like they were able to succeed in some certain areas, but the cornerback group is a bit different already. You've got Juju Brents and Jalen Jones starting now, where it was Dallas Flowers and Darrell Baker Jr., some kind of veterans out there. So I'm interested to see, when it comes to Jones and Brents, are they going to be handsier and perhaps pressed into more mistakes like DPI and holding? We haven't really seen that meltdown that I don't want to say we foresaw it coming, but, we've kind of prepared people for a Rocky Sin type thing to come up at some point, where you've just got these young physical corners. There's probably going to be a time where there's holding and DPI that comes in bunches. We haven't seen that yet. So I'm just wondering how these guys are going to respond in a game like this, where we've already seen, Jacksonville's offensive weapons against this defense, but with totally different cover corners. So
yeah. I mean, hopefully they can be more physical in the passing lanes than what Flowers and Baker Jr. were in week 1. Maybe get their hands in there, dislodge some balls. I know, to go to your point, though, Juju did have that illegal contact last week against DeAndre Hopkins. Really bogus call, though. So, I mean, but that's what we were saying about Rock Ya-Sin, his rookie.
Right.
So maybe that's just our homerism there. But no, I think it'll be interesting to see these young kids out there against this pass catching group, because it's a very nuanced and developed pass catching group, but it's not overly explosive or vertical. I wouldn't classify Calvin Ridley or Christian Kirk or Zay Jones as these like insane vertical threats. They're more the intermediate, like quick hitters, really good route runners that have good hands. Well, maybe not Ridley this year with good hands, but the other two with good hands this year. So, I think it's going to be a good test for them. It's going to be a good test for how quick they can get out of their breaks, how competitive they can be on those quick hitches or on those out routes or those corner routes and stuff like that. So it'll be a big test for these corners, and hopefully they can get their hands in those passing lanes a little better than the Colts corners did in week 1. But coming up, guys, we're going to close out this Jacksonville Jaguars talk this week with our final predictions and final thoughts on this game. But first, testing my skills on PrizePicks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. PrizePicks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes PrizePicks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOn and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, Jake. So getting into our predictions for this, again, I think the Colts are a better team than where they were in week 1. I think they're just more cohesive. I think they've kind of figured out what they're doing a little bit more compared to week 1, where the run game was a mess. The offensive line had one of their worst games of the year in week 1. And the Colts still kind of looked a little defunct compared to how they looked last year, where now, they're rolling into this matchup at 3-2, coming off a big win against the Tennessee Titans. They've beaten the Baltimore Ravens this year. This Colts team is kind of rolling right now, but they don't have their star quarterback. They have Gardner Minshew at quarterback. And again, that doesn't mean Gardner Minshew is a bad quarterback, but it's like we're excited because this team is on the up and up right now, but then you're a little deflated because it's Gardner Minshew at quarterback. And it's not, again, it's no hate to Gardner Minshew, but the excitement right now for this game would be through the roof if Anthony Richardson completed that game last week against the Titans and was getting ready for this one.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so something I'm going to do here. So on the Thursday show, I went with one prediction, but I really could see this going either way. So I'm going to make my argument for the Colts on this one.
You're going to have two predictions, and then you're just going to screen grab the one that was right afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Genius.
When the final bell hits, I'm going to say, look, I did this all along. But no, because this is kind of a toss-up for me. I did pick the Jags on the crossover Thursday episode. But I'll make an argument for the Colts in this one because, again, I don't want to be tied to any one outcome because it's a flip-flop for me. So Jacksonville does not do a great job of getting after the quarterback. And even when they got to Anthony, again, that was half their sacks, like you mentioned. When they did, a lot of it was Anthony running, outside the pocket and things like that. They weren't like pure pocket sacks, So I'm going to say that Gardner gets the ball out of his hands quickly. With those rhythmic yak catches that we think can happen. Those linebackers, I think, can struggle a little bit with the tight ends or those quicker guys like Josh Downs. So I don't think it's going to be like a high scoring thing, but I think the Colts can be like efficient on third down. And again, Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor, I'm not going to call them an unstoppable duo, but like more often than not, I think they're going to be successful. It just makes all the sense in the world. So behind a strong ground game and an efficient short passing game, I think the Colts will do enough. And I'll flip the score that I had. I'll have it 20-17 Colts.
Yeah, I was going to go 23-17 Colts, and I have a couple reasons why. One, like I said in our defensive segment, the Jaguars are a really talented team that's just kind of sloppy right now. They're like kind of a sloppy team. Not that they're poorly coached, it's just their execution is a little lacking at times on both sides of the ball, mostly on offense, but on both sides of the ball. Now you got them coming back from a 2-week stay in London, coming back to Jacksonville. How is that going to affect a team that's already kind of been sloppy? Now it's been it was an effective 2-week stay in London. Like they got their 2 wins and they got their season back on track compared to what their expectations were coming into the year. But I do think that that's going to have a little bit of jet lag on their team. You got the Colts team that's coming in, playing some really good football right now, playing some physical football, who just beat that curse that they had against Tennessee Titans the last couple of years. They came out in that game, and it's like they weren't little brothers to the Tennessee Titans anymore. Now they have a chance to break another curse, the in Jacksonville curse, this week. And I think the Colts are going to come out really ready for this game and really aggressive from the get-go. And the other thing on top of that is, kind of mentioned it in the first segment when we were talking about this Jaguars defense is, look, I'm not saying they're a Matt Eberflus defense. They're not going to sit in that really soft cover 2. Like, they're going to be aggressive and get after it. But you have a defense that cannot get pressure right now. They have struggled mightily this season at getting pressure. Now, if they do get pressure, they'll bring some blitzes and stuff. But for the most part, if they're rushing 4, they're not getting pressure. So when you have a guy like Gardner Minshew, where he's a really good processor, he's really good at getting the ball out of his hand, and if you give him time back there, he's going to find somebody open. What you really want to do with Gardner Minshew is move him off his spot, because that's when the mistakes happen. That's when the lack of arm talent really comes into play. But if you're going against a defense that really can't rush the passer with 4, and they have to bring 5, 6, 7 guys to get any kind of pressure, that is music to a quarterback like Gardner Minshew's ears, because he can kill you all day if all he has to do is find a hot read or diagnose a defense with his 5 seconds in the pocket. He can do that. He can't roll out of the pocket and throw a 60-yard bomb, but he can do those things right there. So if you're trying to beat a quarterback like Gardner Minshew and not getting any pressure at all, you're going to get picked apart. We saw that with CJ Stroud back in week 2 against the Jaguars, where Stroud was just shredding their entire defense the whole game from the pocket, barely under pressure, just was able to relax back there and pick them apart. So I do think the flow of the game will favor Gardner Minshew. I do think the Jaguars have been a little sloppy this year, and it's going to be a tough one against a physical Colts team. And I think the Colts bounce back in terms of defense and just getting after it. So I think 23-17, the Colts are effectively moving the ball all day, maybe not converting all their red zone opportunities on offense, but I do think that they kind of control this game like they did this past week against the Tennessee Titans.
I'm glad you mentioned the London thing, because I was going to make that my final point. 2 weeks in London, and the Colts are doing really well on the road as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it adds up. Jacksonville has every reason in the world to be sluggish if they are on Sunday. So yeah, I think I'll make it a close one again, 2017 Colts, but we're streak busting these last couple weeks, and that's also going to put the Colts on top of the AFC South. 4-2, both of them and the Jaguars are sitting atop it right now, 3-2. I think the Jaguars technically hold the tiebreaker, but Colts keep each week punching their way up the AFC South standings, man. Improbable playoff team so far.
I will say, even if the Colts don't win this week, it is fun to actually give win predictions without laughing at ourselves. Like late last season, man.
Last year we couldn't have done that.
We couldn't even make any win predictions. I mean, I think I picked them to beat the Vikings going into that one, just because it was like, this will be the game that they win just cause. And I mean, it looked like they were going to, but they obviously didn't win that game. But it is fun this year, where I think, the last 3 weeks we've picked the Colts to win. And one of the ones that we didn't pick them to win was the Baltimore game, and they end up winning that one. We picked them to win. I think we picked them to win now for 4 of the 6 games. This upcoming one is the 6th one. So it's been fun to actually be excited about the Colts again, to actually talk about potential wins, despite even having your backup quarterback out there. And Gardner Minshew, we're still talking like, hey, this Colts team can win a game, where last year, starter or not, it was like, oh my gosh, like they're not winning a game. So it is fun to have Colts football back like this. One more thing I did want to say too about the Jaguars pass rush. I know, again, numbers don't say everything. They have been a little bit better than the 9 sacks, but the Colts are coming into this game finally with their starting 5 offensive linemen for the first time since week 2? Week 2, right? Since the first half of week 2. Since the first half of week 2, Bernhard Raimann is coming back. Ryan Kelly's back. Quentin Nelson's back. Will Fries is healthy. Braden Smith seems like he's healthy. I know he's got a little bit of a wrist injury, but the Colts starting 5 offensive linemen are finally back, and they've been playing well, missing 1 or 2 guys the last couple of weeks. So I think this is going to be a really strong game for the Colts offensive line. I think they're going to be able to run the ball fairly well, even though, again, teams have not been doing that against the Jags. And I do think pass protection is going to be fantastic all game long.
I think so too. I think the Colts offensive line is finally back to a point where these matchups against teams that are like really tough in the trenches, like we saw with Tennessee historically the last few years, the Colts are finally able to overcome that and not get absolutely bullied.
Yep.
And so that's what always makes you hesitant to like pick the Colts in those games, is them getting out physical and just outmatched in the trenches. And I just feel more confident in them being able to match that or overpower in that area. So I definitely feel better picking the Colts than I do the Jags in this one. For the Jags, it just feels like, well, the Colts never win in Jacksonville. But like in terms of actual reasoning, I feel better about picking the Colts in this one.
Love it. Love it. You guys let us know in the comment section below what you think about this game. Do the Colts get the win in Jacksonville for the first time in 400 years? Well, we'll talk about that, obviously, after the game. So every day is, again, you guys can follow us here on social media at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we listen to your podcast. We'd love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll see you guys back here on Sunday after the game.